It's Monday and time for the Back to Business podcast, featuring Calgary's industry leaders. Welcome today's show host, Kim Hayden.
Are you part of an organization that runs on passion but struggles with structure? Our guest today, Karin Henderson, is here to talk about the bridge J2K Consulting brings in structuring organizations, nonprofits, so that people helping people can run better, smoother, and reach more without burnout. But first, our land acknowledgement. We here at the Calgary Petroleum Club, in the spirit of reconciliation, honor and acknowledge that the land on which we learn, work, and live is Treaty 7 region of southern Alberta. This place is a traditional homeland for the First Nations and Métis peoples, and today we all are part of this treaty land. Alrighty, Karin with an I, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Kim.
I want to just dive right in and start peeling back some of the layers around J2K Consulting. What inspired you to start the consulting and dedicate it to helping people who help others?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a bit of a few year long answer. I took a journey into working full time in non-for-profit in 2019. I started out as an entry level position in a small nonprofit in Calgary, and I loved my job. I loved that I could help people. I loved building community. I loved connecting with volunteers every day. And soon after, we had our COVID pandemic, but skipping forward past that, I started to recognize the level of burnout in the nonprofit sector. And as a single widowed mom of 2 kids, burnout wasn't an option for me. So I just kept driving until one day it was an option for me. When your body and your mind disconnect, and all of a sudden it's really hard to get out of bed and do that job that you love and you have complete passion for. And so I recognized part of those reasons were those limited resources, the constant need to do more with less, and lack of support in the industry. So I took a step back and I looked towards a lot of my other colleagues across North America and started to see what they were doing. I was surrounded by a lot of people who had gone off on the consulting journey and took a lot of time to chat with them and discuss, what are the things you like about your business and what, is filling your bucket by helping people help people. And I started to frame my business around that. And I looked at how can I help alleviate or relieve some of those pressures and stresses that I know are existent in everyday life for people that work in nonprofit in a sustainable way.
You had mentioned I always talk off mic before we go live, but you had mentioned around like systems and then the fractional consulting that we're starting to see more and more people consider. When we're talking about burnout,
Mm-hmm.
burnout is, as you said, operating with less and having to do more with less. And so systems become very critical in ensuring that operations move forward. Can we dive into, over the last 20 years in the nonprofit space and the leadership, how can our fractional experts out there contribute time or take on one at a time and become part of the larger system of nonprofit and work with J2K? How does that work if somebody's in the fractional space?
Yeah, so I think it does work in a lot of ways, but one way that it works in the way that you're asking is by solving that one problem. So when you're working in a nonprofit, you often are wearing many hats. You might be the volunteer coordinator, but you're also dipping into a little bit of the marketing. You're also a fundraiser. You're also a people manager. So there's a lot of hats that you're wearing. You're not just focusing on one area. Hiring me as a fractional or hiring any nonprofit fractional, you can empower that consultant to work in one area and just get that one job done. And what the benefit is you're getting an executive level knowledge and experience for a fraction of their time, for a fraction of the cost.
And I would think that as the workspace, the global workspace is shifting. It's like quicksand out there right now. And everybody's trying to find their footing. Like, where do I belong? And a lot of people are moving into the fractional space because they've either been right-sized or the organizations are just not as conducive to their mental health or their goals or even where they're at within their own personal journey. What are some of the things that you see that are really needed by some of these nonprofits? We talked a bit about systems and making do with less to do more. What are some of the things that are really needed or fractional advice or support by these nonprofits?
Yeah. So, I mean, it does vary. Every nonprofit is unique in what their needs are. But those systems, for sure, systems and processes, and somebody who has the time to sit back and create them. Many people, I would say probably the great majority of people have a volunteer experience. And it's either gone really well or they went in and they had no idea what they were there for. They had no idea what they were doing, what their responsibilities were, what the place was going to look like when they got there, who they were supposed to contact. And it's simple. It sounds really simple, but people don't have time to put those systems and processes together.
I think so many of us are building the plane as we fly it.
Exactly.
And I think a lot of doers are not system creators.
Exactly.
So there is a pretty massive disconnect there. When you describe your approach as helping people help people, what does that look like in actual practice? What does that look like?
So in actual practice, again, it's unique to every organization. One of the organizations that I'm working with right now, they have been doing an incredible grassroots movement of absolute joy and hope over the holiday season for over 4 decades. And they've been very successful in the space that they're in, but they don't have capacity to build out what the processes look like. So it often has been a last minute, oh my gosh, hey, we need this, or we need some money, or we need some supplies, or we need some volunteers. Whereas now, working with them, we've had the time to step back, create the processes. We started this in the summertime, started creating the processes for December, and we're well on to onboarding our volunteers, onboarding our families, fundraising, third-party fundraisers, and events, because we've had the time to sit back and we've had somebody who's been able to sit back and create those processes. And now we're just rolling. We're ready for Christmas. We are ready to help families in Calgary to bring them joy. We're not last minute. We're not in reactive state. We've had the time to sit back and be proactive.
I always say that there's only 3 types of emergencies out there. One requires a storm shelter or a life raft or something along those lines, right? The second will require an ambulance or a surgeon. And the third just required proper planning.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so I tell my team that I'm at that point in my business that if we are running into and we feel that it's an emergency, we need to stop, put the brakes on, and figure out. But when you're in the nonprofit space and you've got momentum, now you have people depending on you.
Exactly.
What's the greatest challenge that you face when you go into these new nonprofits that you are going to be working with, you are going to be helping to get them to say, it's okay to slow down for just a moment while we get this all figured out so that you can accelerate again? What does that look like?
Well, the sky is not always falling. And that is the biggest thing. We are always in a reactive state. I lived in a reactive state working in a nonprofit for a number of years, and it is not a healthy place to be. The sky is not always falling. And outwardly, we were often referred to, oh, but you just look like a duck on water. And you know what? That's not a compliment. That is not a compliment. Burnout is not a badge. And so coming in and saying, first of all, I chat with my clients and say, I don't work in reaction. I work in reflection. And so there isn't an emergency that we're going to have, because what we're doing here is not emergent work, right?
Yep.
So really coaching them through that and setting that as a foundation for our relationship.
Do you feel that a lot of or not a lot, do you feel that at times the emergency and this hypersensitivity comes from the fact that leadership is so impassioned? I mean, these nonprofits don't start because people sit down and go, oh, this will make good money for my shareholders.
Right.
They come from a point of, this was a pain point. This was a challenge for me. This is something that I'm so passionate about. I don't want other people to experience it. And do you find that sometimes that lends itself to that it's got to happen today. It's got to happen today feel?
I think there's a place for that. And I also think it's an individual responsibility. I have seen oftentimes where, people take on the crisis or the problems of the people that they're serving, rather than understanding that those aren't your problems. You're here to help, but it's not your problem. It's your responsibility to do your job, but it's not your responsibility for the people that you're serving to not be in the situation that they're in. We are all with the same goal, trying to make it a better place to live, trying to help people out as best that we can. But at the end of the day, every person is responsible for their own, right? And so a lot of people in nonprofits sometimes get caught up, and I did myself, got very caught up in, well, if I don't provide this service, who's going to do it, right? And it felt like such a massive responsibility.
Yeah.
And so being able to take back the understanding of my responsibility is to the role that I'm playing in this organization, right? Yes, my responsibility is to helping people, right? I care for those people. I care for what their struggles are, right? But I also have to consider myself, right? And we had chatted about this, you and I being of a similar vintage, and that age that we're at where, living a life in full panic all of the time, and high cortisol levels and a hormonal imbalance. It's not healthy for us.
No.
We can do a lot with calmer minds.
It's almost like that. Do you ever feel like you're a flight attendant and you're standing there going, the oxygen mask, right? Because if you don't take care of yourself, you cannot care for the people around you. And I think that when you enter a heart-centric space, we put ourselves on back burner. We're expendable. When you go in and you talk about sustainable systems with these organizations, how do you frame that to where they don't believe that they're losing heart? Because that is, I think that would be, we have this whole thing around, well, if it's, systematic, if it's process oriented, it can't be heart centric.
Mm-hmm.
How do you address that? Or has that even been an issue?
I've had this experience where, in having a one-on-one coffee with some of the employees of an organization that I'm working with, and I can tell they're embarrassed when I ask a question, about, for example, what's your plan for volunteer onboarding? And they're, oh, well, we haven't quite done that because, and they feel this embarrassment, and it's all about validating. And honestly, hey, you're not alone. This is very common. It is very common to not have that plan. So that's why I'm here. So really just meeting people where they're at and coming in from having experience of going into places where there wasn't that system and being able to create them and saying, hey, I'm here to help you, right? And really just listening and letting people be vulnerable.
So you've mentioned a couple times of our vintage, right? And I know the way that I raised my children. My children have done a ton of volunteer work. In fact, I'm right now putting together a street team to be able to work specifically with our community associations to be outreach and connectivity to people, families in these outlying areas, right? I can do that conversation with my kids because my background.
Yeah.
The real estate thing,
Yeah.
It wasn't just me handing out candy. It was
Right.
my kids with me, and we were and my kids grew up in doing community service. But I want to, and I saw a thread here that I'd like to pull on a little about younger people volunteering. How do we reach them? Is there a gap? Are we seeing a generational gap? How could we encourage them or bring them into this sphere? And how does volunteering help with loneliness,
Mm-hmm.
help with, people feeling, I guess, depressed or the mental health? And I know you're not a mental health expert. I'm not asking you to put that on. But in your experience, how does volunteering feed the soul, feed the person? Because I am doing interview after interview after interview about the loneliness epidemic, not knowing who your neighbors are, the depression and the anxiety and all of these things. Could it be as simple as just stepping in?
Yeah. For the first part of your question, there's two things that I believe in: inclusion and empowerment. So when I was teaching my very first iteration of Karin's life as an adult, I was teaching kindergarten, and my mentor, Carol Scarrett, said to me, The answer to all problems is to give responsibility, right? So giving younger people, the youth, that empowerment and responsibility of being in charge of something and in bringing them in, including them. There are very few volunteer opportunities for youth in Calgary. There are some great organizations like Youth Central, and they provide a ton of opportunities for kids, but it's limited time and areas, often the challenge. Kids they see they're, wanting to go to a particular organization. It's sorry, we don't help with kids under 18 or kids under 12 or whatever it may be. So it's difficult, right?
Yes.
And as you were saying, you created your own volunteer opportunities as you were building community and you brought your kids in, right? And that's a community builder. So if it's just going and picking up garbage at your, community cleanup, any way that you can involve them, helping. Here's a great time to volunteer helping with rink maintenance in your neighborhoods. There's a lot of neighborhoods that need help with that. But providing them the opportunity and showing them that it's there, right? Bringing the kids in and giving them that responsibility and ownership.
And I'm going to make an assumption here, but we all know what that leads to. But I'm going to assume that with parents, that if you do have a 12 or 13-year-old, that even if the organization says, well, they need to be 14, but ask the question, can they be 12 with a parent?
Yeah. Or what can they do that doesn't necessarily fit into the mold of a volunteer job? I was just chatting to a colleague last week, and they were asking me, well, I do this. Is that volunteering? Yes. Do you do it for free and on your own time? Yes, that's volunteering. It doesn't have to look like, signing up for an organization, volunteering for a shift, and then leaving and being an episodic volunteer, right? It can look like I shovel my neighbor's sidewalk. Yes. I went and cleaned up their leaves or took their pumpkins to the compost or whatever it might be. When you're doing those acts as simple as in your community, you're volunteering.
Absolutely. And volunteering is community.
Exactly.
I'm a huge advocate of volunteering, of creating space, and I like that you mentioned giving ownership over a role of responsibility, right? Everybody out there has a capability, and it's up to the leaders to find the capability within that person to help them. We're not trying to cram square pegs into round holes.
Exactly.
We're identifying where do they fit and how can we help them excel.
Yeah.
And sometimes it takes 3, 4, 5 different tries, different fits, and it, have you ever come across this, and how do you handle it as a leader within these spaces? How do you go about having the conversation that, okay, that wasn't maybe the best fit, let's try this over here? What does that look like?
Yeah. You know what? There's a job for everyone, and that's a big part of knowing your volunteers, right? If you've got somebody and their job is to break down the cardboard and you can just see them with their shoulders are down, their head is down, they're kind of stomping on the cardboard, they're not putting any energy or effort to it. And then you ask them, like, how did you enjoy this work? Well, it didn't really fulfill me. All right, well, let's talk about what other, jobs that are here that match your skills and find that fit, right? It's as simple as a conversation. Sometimes the opportunity is not there. There might not be that role within the organization. But that's an opportunity for creating a new role, developing with that volunteer, really just, recognizing their contribution and acknowledging that they have a skill set that you can definitely use.
I have a feeling a lot of this is similar to raising our kids, right? I guess just giving validation and bringing people in.
Yeah.
Again, creating that community. And I love this conversation. I think you have my dream job. I think you have my dream job.
I think I have my dream job.
I just love what you do. Now, you're also active in youth sports.
Yes.
How has that, shaped your perspective on the mentoring and teamwork?
Yeah, so I started volunteering in youth sports when my son started playing minor hockey.
Okay.
When he was 5 years old.
How, if you don't mind me asking?
He's 21.
Oh,
so I've been here for a minute.
Yeah, awesome.
And so that was a great experience. Back in those days, it was called Midnapore Hockey Association, and we had some incredible people on the board and leadership. And I considered myself a serial volunteer. I would have to sit on my hands at meetings because they'd say, "Anybody want to?" And I'd put my hand up. I was a stay-at-home mom, and so I threw my passion into helping my community, helping build my community. And it started off with volunteering in minor hockey. And as he got older, I continued to do that. I was always, quite often, there was a few years I took off, but I was always the team manager, tournament coordinator, whatever it may be, whatever I could do to help. And then he was finished his U18 year, and it was like, oh my gosh, there's no more hockey. And one of his friends said, no, there's Junior C. And we went, Junior C, well, what's that? And, started to look into it and I thought, okay, this is cool. So we have an organization in the South Calgary called Southside Hockey. And that organization was at a transitional point. And they said to me like, hey, can you help with this transition? And I said, of course, because, I wasn't sitting on my hands. So I said, yeah, I can help. And I had some more time and capacity with older kids. And I partnered with Ryan Turner, who's the head coach as well as president of the organization. And he's been, he grew up playing Southside. He is now has been a coach for 7 years and just a fantastic human. And together we rebranded the organization and changed what our mission and focus was. And really it's building leaders on and off the ice. And we've created an incredible mentorship program. We've empowered the players who are, 18 to 21-year-old males in South Calgary to really own their organization. They are the membership. A number of them sit on our board. After players are done playing, they come back as coaches and we build them through that process. They are organizing their own tournament. They are, deciding what their apparel looks like, which is a simple thing, but it's a job for them.
Absolutely.
And, when we go out and say like, hey, who wants to do this? They are all hands up. They created a scholarship program for their peers, as well as a financial assistance program for their peers. And it's been an incredible few years with that organization and really seeing it grow to the place where kids want to play in South Calgary. We had last season, we had almost 50 kids try out for our team. And in years before, it was like trying to find kids to come play. Right?
Amazing. Amazing. And giving opportunity. Everybody, if somebody loves something, they want to see that they're valued there.
Yeah.
And it's giving opportunity. Not everybody is going to be destined to go and play for the Flames.
Yeah.
But it doesn't. I've enjoyed, I enjoy a Hitman's game. In all reality, sometimes more than a Flames game.
Well, and these guys are lifelong lovers of
Exactly.
hockey. And what we're doing with them now, teaching them what is a board, what is board governance, how do you vote, what's an agenda, what's a motion, all of these pieces that are new to them. In a few years, they're going to be those parent volunteers at their hockey associations like I was when my son was 5 years old. And they're going to have a clue of what's going on. They're going to know what it's like to be on a board and what governance looks like. And so they're coming in with a little bit of a step up. And they're also going to have this great experience, I hope, and have the desire to be those volunteers.
Let's talk transferable skill sets.
Yes, exactly.
Some of the best public speakers, leaders, mentors out there when we look at one of my favorite books, Atomic Habits. James Clear was a baseball player, and he brings a lot of the methodology and systems of self-improvement and accountability from his sports training into the business world and into his personal relationship space. Is that something else that you see these young men evolve with? Because you're talking, when we're hearing about learning how these boards work and learning how to do the votes, that's a political awareness that so few people have until they hit their 40s and 50s, right? And that's why sometimes we have a disparage between the conversation points, and we see that opposition space that we see in social media over, our leaders should do this and our leaders should do that, and nobody's listening. It sounds to me as if this organization, you're cultivating a space to actually grow tomorrow's leaders.
Absolutely. Yep, absolutely. And that it really is. It's in our mission statement, about growing leaders of tomorrow, right? And again, those transferable skills and saying to these young men, I keep calling them kids or boys, but they're young men. It's just an old habit. They come in and I say, okay, well, what are your interests, right? And we've got one who is an incredible young man. He is in his final year studying broadcasting. And he is, you know what, I really want to be the manager of social media and marketing. Great. So let's talk about it, right? And what does that mean? Setting out those brand guidelines even, right? Like, let's develop that. And you're now running our social media. So what's your responsibility? What's your plan, right? When are you posting? How are you doing that? And really, it's a great skill. And it's putting also what he's learning into practice,
I
right?
love that.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that. Not everybody out there, we see these 21, 22, 23-year-olds. Not everyone is coming from a home that is centered, right? And to know that there is a community space that they can learn maybe what they were unable to learn at home. It just feels, again, we're looking at this as like this volunteer space, this community space. We're designed. We are designed. Human beings are designed to be community animals, and yet we keep pulling apart. And now somebody like yourself steps in, creates that space.
Yeah.
That's amazing. How do you see the nonprofit landscape changing over the next 5 years, especially here in Alberta?
Well, here in Alberta, I can speak Calgary specifically. We're seeing a lot more awareness on where our gaps are in nonprofits and how we can better serve our teams, our staff. It's nonprofit in Alberta is huge. We contribute millions to the GDP, right? But we don't provide an appropriate compensation for the people that are working in nonprofit. Many people that work in nonprofit have to rely on the very services that they're providing. So I see that there's a huge motion and movement within our community, bringing that to the table and bringing that to the eyes of the government. I think there's also a little bit of a confusion of what nonprofits are, and it doesn't mean that everybody there is a volunteer, right? You have to spend a little money to make money, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, and most people who are heading a nonprofit, and they don't work 40 hours a week, they're working 50, 60, and 70 hours a week. They still need to pay the bank for their roof over their head.
Exactly.
They still need to have gas for their vehicle. And I think that's where a lot of people miss. And I have heard some interesting things with the future of robotics and the future of AI and the shift within kind of our economics in Canada. We're realigning a Canada first economy, that there is talk about how do we, if you have robots stocking your shelves, graveyard shift at the grocery store, where does the financial compensation come back into the human beings within Canada that are to be the consumers? And there's all these conversations going on. And I'm going to assume, folks, that these conversations are conversations that we need to look further into, even for our nonprofit and our community builders. Countries like Netherlands has these great programs in place through like universal base income that allows people to go out and serve the community and still be able to be taking care of themselves. And I think that Canada could potentially be on that same path. I hear a lot of that talk, and I'm going to keep my fingers crossed. I'm not wanting to take this down a political role here. However, I would love to see, and I would, right in this nonprofit space, I'd also like to see moms getting compensated, because that's a lot of unpaid labor, let me tell you. Being a mom, folks. And I tried to do the at-home thing, and I really was not good at it. And I have huge admiration, because people don't realize at-home moms are also the people that are making the cookies for the kindergarten class. They're organizing the second grade class field trips. They're cutting out all the different things that help make the different seasons within the classrooms. People don't realize the amount of volunteer work that moms do on a day-to-day. I can see this organic follow through for you, that it's that passion of raising your children and being part of the community, and now doing it professionally.
Well, and even when you talk about, volunteers at schools, right? And a lot of schools don't have the systems and processes where they're recognizing those hours or, giving credit for those hours for people because those hours are important, right? And again, those transferable skills like, as I said, I was a serial volunteer. And so I was always in the hockey and dance at school, whatever, in the community, whatever it would be. And my husband had said to me at one point, I thought you were a stay-at-home mom. How come you're never home? Right? But we're out there putting in those hours because we can, right? Some of us we're privileged enough to be able to do that and have that time. And that's what keeps these systems running, right? That's what keeps these organizations running is the volunteers behind them.
I 110% agree. All right. Now, you're going to put your fairy wings on.
Okay.
All right. If you could wave a magic wand and fix one systemic issue across the nonprofit world, what would it be?
Well, I think a lot of it comes back to funding, but sustainability. Sustainability and time. If I could give people more time, which is, something that I work to do by, coming in and consulting with them and building those systems, time is most precious.
Yeah. Time, we don't get that back.
No, we do not get that back. So if you can find an hour in your day by putting in a system and a process, wow, what can you do with that hour?
So here at the Cal Peak Club, 76 years in, we're in our 76th year now. We're still working at building what does community mean and how do we bring this together? And it is changing. Like when I came into the club for the first time 4 years ago, I was blown away by the evolution of what, Tony Marie and Glenda and the leadership team was doing and everything. And it's like, okay, I can lean into this community because the community is not exclusive anymore. It's now inclusive, right? Bringing every walks of life into and helping to support economic development, personal growth development, so forth and so on. And so what does community mean to you, especially as somebody who builds it every day?
So, yeah, that's a great question. Community is where we're rooted, right? I'm a born and raised Calgarian, and similar to you, I grew up in a household where we volunteered a lot, right? So I was organizing fundraisers and volunteer events from a very young age. I was listening to you on the podcast talking about selling Girl Guide cookies. And I really resonated with that because my sister and I were known as the con sisters because we would sell bunches of lilac flowers to people who had lilac bushes in their yard, right? But we could sell anything, And so growing up in that space and really shout out to the ladies of Hillgrove Drive, we had a great community of moms and mentors in that space when I was growing up that really taught me about what community meant, right? And it meant looking out for your neighbor and it meant helping when you can. It meant being involved and not sitting around just talking about what's wrong, but affecting that change.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Quit talking about what's wrong and just step up and do something right.
Yeah.
Karin, I can't thank you enough for coming in because this is literally something so close to my heart. And, I can promise you that everybody needs somebody to take a lead. And sometimes it'll be you, sometimes it'll be the neighbors, sometimes it will be the person down the street. Yeah. To all the parents out there that have young children, your children are far more capable than you think they are. Get them out, have them work beside you, get them volunteering at a very young age. Empower them. And for those of you who are sitting around complaining about your neighbor not shoveling their walk, I want to put a challenge out there this winter. Go out and shovel their walk. And if their walk doesn't get shoveled the next time, you go out and shovel again. And then you're going to go up to the door and you say, is everything okay? Can I be of assistance? I just noticed, and can I help you? Because that may be a new Canadian that doesn't know the rules. That could be a very pregnant woman, which this actually happened to us. Our husband's up north. That could be somebody who is going through a serious illness or somebody who is in a state of grief. But highly likely, it is not somebody choosing just to tick you off.
Definitely not.
Thank you, Karin.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us today on the Back to Business podcast. Be sure to visit calpeteclub.com, CalPeteclub.com, to find out more about upcoming events, networking opportunities, and membership. If you are not already a valued member at the CPC, where we are proudly connecting and supporting Calgary's business leaders.